The silence in my mother's house was a physical thing. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was a presence, thick and heavy, that pressed in on me from all sides. It smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and the faint, sweet scent of the rose potpourri Mom had kept in a crystal bowl on the mantelpiece for 30 years. That scent, once a comfort, now felt like a ghost in the room. I ran my hand over the worn velvet of her favorite armchair, the fabric cool and smooth beneath my palm. The indent where she always sat was still there, a perfect, heartbreaking contour of a person who was gone forever. Sunlight, thick with dancing dust motes, streamed through the bay window, illuminating the space she used to occupy. I could almost see her there, her silver hair catching the light, a half-finished crossword puzzle resting in her lap. My chest ached with a hollowness so vast it threatened to swallow me whole. It had been 3 weeks since the funeral. 3 weeks of navigating a world that felt muted, the colors washed out, the sounds muffled by a constant fog of grief. My brother, Leo, had been Leo. He'd flown in from California for the service, all tailored suits and a somber, practiced expression. He delivered a beautiful eulogy, his voice cracking at just the right moments, painting a picture of a sainted mother and a devoted son. He'd accepted condolences with a firm handshake and a sad, knowing smile. He played the part perfectly. But I saw the flicker in his eyes, the impatience in the way he tapped his expensive leather shoes on the church floor. He was here for the final act, the reading of the will. I was the one who had stayed. I was the one who had held Mom's hand through the long, dwindling years of her illness. I was the one who learned to manage her dozens of prescriptions, who pureed her food when she could no longer chew, who sat with her through the long, terrifying nights when her mind would wander and she'd call out for my father, who had been gone for over a decade. My world had shrunk to the 4 walls of this house, to the rhythm of her breathing, to the soft, papery feel of her skin. And I wouldn't have traded a single moment of it. Leo called me 2 days after he flew back to his sprawling, sun-drenched life. His voice, usually so smooth and confident, had a different edge to it, a carefully constructed casualness that set my teeth on edge. "Clara, hey. How are you holding up?" he'd asked, the sound of distant traffic humming in the background of his call. "I'm here, Leo. The house is so quiet." My own voice sounded thin, a stranger's voice. "Yeah, I bet. Listen, about Mom's estate. Mr. Abernathy called. He wants to schedule the reading of the will for next Friday. I'm flying back in. Figured we should get it over with." "Get it over with," I repeated, the words leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. For him, this was a transaction, a final piece of paperwork. For me, it felt like another funeral, the final, legal confirmation that she was truly, irrevocably gone. The day of the reading was gray and damp, a fine mist clinging to the windows and making the old oak trees in the yard weep onto the lawn. Mr. Abernathy's office was downtown, in one of those old brick buildings that always smelled of dusty law books and stale coffee. The air inside was stuffy, the temperature a little too warm. The leather chair I sat in creaked every time I shifted my weight, a small, protesting sound in the heavy silence. Leo sat beside me, smelling of expensive cologne and ambition. He was tapping his pen against the leather-bound notebook, a rhythmic, irritating little click that vibrated right through me. Mr. Abernathy, a kind man with a gentle face and eyes that had seen too much family sorrow, cleared his throat. He adjusted his spectacles, the fluorescent office lights glinting off the lenses. "Eleanor was a wonderful woman," he began, his voice soft. "She was very clear in her final wishes. She wanted to ensure there was no confusion." He unfolded the document, the crisp paper crackling in the quiet room. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I didn't care about the money. There wasn't much left besides a modest savings account and some bonds. All I cared about was the house. This house. The one our father built with his own 2 hands. The one where every wall, every floorboard, held a memory. It was my sanctuary, the only place I felt connected to her, to them. Mr. Abernathy read through the preliminary clauses, the legal jargon washing over me. Then he got to the main asset. Regarding the property at 1427 Elm Street, he said, his voice steady, Eleanor's will states, and I quote, to my daughter, Clara, who has been my rock, my caregiver, and my constant companion, I leave my home and all its contents. It is my deepest wish that she continue to find peace and happiness within its walls, as I did. May the garden she so lovingly tended with me continue to be a source of joy. A wave of relief so profound it made me dizzy washed over me. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, hot and sharp. I could feel Mom's love in those words, a final, beautiful gift. I glanced at Leo, expecting. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a flicker of disappointment, a tight-lipped nod of acceptance. I was not prepared for what I saw. His face was a mask of cold fury. The charming, grieving son was gone, replaced by a stranger with hard, calculating eyes. The pen in his hand had stopped tapping. He was gripping it so tightly his knuckles were white. He let the silence hang in the air for a long, suffocating moment before he spoke, his voice dangerously low. That's interesting. Mr. Abernathy looked at him over his glasses. Leo? Is there a problem? A problem? Leo let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. It was a sound like breaking glass. You could say that. There's no way my mother was in her right mind when she signed this. No way. I flinched as if he'd slapped me. Leo, what are you talking about? She knew exactly what she was doing. We talked about it. He turned to me then, and the look in his eyes was one I'd never seen before. It was a mixture of pity and contempt. Clara, you were with her 24/7. She was sick. She was confused. Her mind, it wasn't all there at the end. You know that. That's not true. My voice rose, shrill and defensive. She had bad days, but she was lucid. She was my mother. Exactly, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if he were sharing a sad, secret truth with Mr. Abernathy. She was your mother, and you were her whole world. It's a classic case. Undue influence. My sister, bless her heart, is fragile. She gets very emotional. She has a history of not seeing things clearly. The room suddenly felt very cold. The air thinned, and I couldn't seem to draw a full breath. A history? What are you talking about, Leo? He gave me another one of those pitying looks. We don't have to get into this here, Clara. He turned back to the lawyer. Mr. Abernathy, I'm sorry to say this, but I will be contesting this will. My mother's final wishes were not to disinherit her son. Her final wishes were clouded by her illness and my sister's overwhelming presence. Overwhelming presence. Fragile. The words echoed in the stuffy office, twisting the last 5 years of my life, the years of selfless, exhausting, love-filled care, into something ugly and manipulative. He was erasing me. He was erasing the truth. Mr. Abernathy sighed, a long, weary sound. He folded the will and placed it carefully on his desk. Leo, I must advise you, these cases are difficult and deeply unpleasant. Eleanor seemed perfectly sound of mind when we executed this document 2 years ago. 2 years ago, Leo repeated, seizing on the words. A lot can happen in 2 years. I have concerns. Serious concerns about my sister's mental state and her influence on my mother. And I intend to prove it. He stood up, smoothing down the front of his expensive suit. He didn't look at me again. He just walked out of the office, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving me alone in the suffocating silence, the scent of betrayal thick in the air. I sat there, frozen in that creaking leather chair, the beautiful, loving words from my mother's will turning to ash in my mind. He was going to take my home. And to do it, he was going to destroy me. The weeks that followed were a blur of muted horror. A thick, formal envelope arrived by courier, the paper heavy and intimidating. It was from a law firm I'd never heard of, one with a long, hyphenated name that screamed money and ruthlessness. It was official notice. Leo was formally contesting the will on the grounds of lack of testamentary capacity and undue influence. The legal terms felt alien, clinical words for something so deeply personal and ugly. He was arguing that Mom was not sane when she wrote her will, and that I, her daughter, had coerced her. My first call was to Mr. Abernathy, my hand trembling so badly I could barely dial the numbers. He was kind, but his voice was grave. I was afraid of this, Clara. Leo is serious. You're going to need your own counsel. I can act as a witness to the signing, but this is a litigation matter now. I'm not a trial lawyer. He gave me a name, Sarah Davis. She's sharp, he'd said. She's tough. You'll need that. Sarah Davis's office was the opposite of Mr. Abernathy's. It was in a sleek, modern building of glass and steel. The air inside smelled of clean carpets and something faintly citrusy. There were no dusty books, only minimalist art on the walls and a view of the city skyline that made my small world in Mom's house feel even smaller. Sarah herself was a force of nature. She was tall, with a sharp, intelligent face and dark hair pulled back in a severe knot. She wore a perfectly tailored gray suit and spoke in crisp, no-nonsense sentences. I sat across a vast glass desk from her, clutching a worn leather satchel that contained my life story. I told her everything. I told her about Mom's diagnosis, about the progression of her illness, about the years I'd spent as her caregiver. I described our days together, the quiet mornings with tea and toast, the afternoons in the garden, the long nights when I'd read to her from her favorite books. My voice cracked as I spoke, the memories so fresh, so raw. "And your brother?" she asked, her pen poised over a yellow legal pad. Her eyes were piercing, analytical. "Leo, he was always the golden one," I said, the words tasting like old resentment. "Smart, charming, successful. He moved to California after college and never looked back. He'd visit for Christmas and a week in the summer. He'd bring lavish gifts and tell exciting stories about his life. Mom was so proud of him. But he wasn't here. He wasn't here for the hard parts. He'd call, ask how she was, and I'd say she's okay, because what else could I say? How do you explain the slow, heartbreaking fate of a person over the phone in 5 minutes? Did he contribute financially to her care? I shook my head. No. He offered once, a long time ago. He said he could help pay for a nursing home. Mom, the thought terrified her. She made me promise I would never let her go to one of those places. She wanted to be in her own home, with her garden. So I told Leo we were managing. I used Mom's savings, and when that got low, I used my own. Sarah wrote furiously, her pen scratching against the paper. "And his claim that you are," and I quote from his petition, "emotionally unstable?" A hot flush of shame and anger crept up my neck. It's ridiculous. I've been grieving. I've been exhausted for 5 years. Does that make me unstable? A few years ago, after I lost my job to be a full-time caregiver, I went through a rough patch. I was depressed. I saw a therapist for a few months. It helped. I told Leo about it on the phone one night, when I was feeling low. I was reaching out to my brother. I never imagined he would weaponize it. He will, Sarah said, her voice flat, matter of fact. He will weaponize everything, Clara. Every tear, every moment of frustration, every prescription for an anti-anxiety medication. We are entering a phase called discovery. His lawyers will depose you. They will request medical records, financial statements, journals. They will talk to your friends, your neighbors. Their goal is to build a narrative that you are an unstable, manipulative person who took advantage of a vulnerable old woman. Our goal is to prove you are a devoted daughter who is honoring her mother's true wishes. The word depose sent a chill down my spine. It sounded like something that happened to criminals, not to someone who had spent years making sure her mother's socks were warm. The discovery process was a systematic violation. Strangers, Leo's lawyers, sifted through the most intimate details of my life. They requested my medical records, and I had to sign the release, feeling my cheeks burn with humiliation as I imagined them poring over my therapist's notes from years ago. They subpoenaed my bank records, looking for any sign that I had been misusing Mom's money I had supplemented with my own until I had nothing left. The deposition was the worst. It took place in a sterile conference room in his lawyer's high-rise building. The air was thick with tension. I sat at one side of a long, polished mahogany table with Sarah. Across from me sat Leo and his lawyer, a man named Marcus Thorne, whose smile was as sharp and predatory as a shark's. A court stenographer sat at the end of the table, her fingers poised over her machine, ready to capture every word, every stutter, every sigh. Thorne began his questioning in a deceptively gentle tone. "Ms. Jensen, thank you for coming in today. We just want to clear a few things up. You were your mother's primary caregiver for the last 5 years, is that correct?" "Yes." My voice was a whisper. Sarah placed a calming hand on my arm under the table. "A demanding job, I imagine. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week?" "It was. But I wanted to do it." Of course. "Admirable." He smiled that razor-sharp smile. "But it must have been stressful. Did you ever feel overwhelmed? Trapped, perhaps?" "I felt tired sometimes," I admitted. "But never trapped." "Never?" "Your brother, Leo, has mentioned several phone calls where you were crying, saying you couldn't take it anymore. Are you saying those calls never happened?" My blood ran cold. He was twisting our conversations. I was having a bad day. I was venting to my brother. I didn't mean. I never said I couldn't take it. "So you were crying hysterically on the phone to your brother," Thorne rephrased, his voice smooth as silk. "About how difficult your life was in that house." "That's not what I said." "But you were crying? You were emotional?" "My mother was sick." "Of course I was emotional." He moved on, seamlessly. "Let's talk about your mother's finances. You had power of attorney, correct? You handled all her accounts." "Yes. I paid her bills. I bought her groceries and her medications." "I see here," he said, sliding a bank statement across the table, "a withdrawal for $300 in cash every week. For 5 years. Can you explain those?" "That was for household expenses. Groceries, cleaning supplies, things for the garden. Things that are easier to pay for with cash." $300? Every single week? For 2 people, one of whom was bedridden for the last year. It seems excessive." He let the word hang in the air. He was painting me as a thief. Leo just sat there, staring at his hands, a mask of sad concern on his face. He wouldn't even look at me. The questions went on for hours. Thorne picked apart my past, my long-ago therapy, my decision to quit my job. He asked about my social life, or lack thereof. "So, for 5 years, Ms. Jensen, you rarely left the house? You had no romantic relationships? Few friends you saw regularly?" "My mother needed me," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and exhaustion. "Or did you need her?" he countered, leaning forward. "Did you need her to be dependent on you? Did isolating her from the outside world, from her son, make it easier for you to control her? To influence her decisions?" "No. That's a horrible thing to say." Sarah finally intervened. "Mr. Thorne, you are badgering the witness." But the damage was done. He had taken my love, my sacrifice, and twisted it into a portrait of a lonely, unstable, manipulative spinster. The days leading up to the trial were a living nightmare. Neighbors I had known for years suddenly became distant. I'd see them at the grocery store and they'd give me a tight, awkward smile and hurry away. Leo had been busy. He'd been calling them, calling old family friends, even our Aunt Carol, my mother's sister. He was planting his seeds of doubt, spinning his narrative of my fragility and his deep concern. Aunt Carol called me one evening, her voice strained. "Clara, honey. Leo called me. He told me, he said you haven't been well. That you're not yourself. He's so worried about you. Aunt Carol, he's lying, I pleaded, desperation clawing at my throat. He wants the house. He's trying to make me look crazy so he can get it. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Well, she said slowly, doubt lacing her tone, he did sound very convincing. And you have been through a lot. Maybe you're not thinking clearly. He said he has, recordings. Recordings. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. I thought back to the countless times I'd been on the phone with him, sobbing from exhaustion and grief after a particularly hard day with Mom. The times I'd screamed in frustration into a pillow in my room, thinking I was alone. Had he been setting me up all this time? The thought was so monstrous, so deeply sick, that I couldn't fully process it. I started to feel like I was living in a glass house, with everyone watching me, judging me. I'd jump every time the phone rang. I started to second-guess my own memories. Was I unstable? Had I been a bad caregiver? Leo's poison was seeping into my own mind. I'd wander through the house at night, the floorboards groaning under my feet, touching my mother's things, trying to hold on to the truth. I'd go out into the garden, the one we tended together, and pull weeds under the moonlight, the damp earth cool and real beneath my fingers, a small anchor in a world that had come unmoored. The scent of the night-blooming jasmine, Mom's favorite, would fill the air, and I'd whisper to her, I'm not crazy, am I, Mom? Tell me I'm not crazy. But the only answer was the whisper of the wind in the leaves. The morning the trial began, a cold, sterile dread had settled deep in my bones. It was a physical sensation, an icy weight in the pit of my stomach. I stood in front of the mirror in my mother's bedroom, the room that was now mine, and I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Her eyes were hollow, ringed with the dark purple of sleepless nights. Her skin was pale, stretched taut over her cheekbones. I had chosen my outfit with deliberate care, a simple navy blue dress, conservative, unassuming. I wanted to look stable. I wanted to look sane. But I felt like a fraud, an actress playing a part one hadn't rehearsed. The scent of Mom's lavender sachet still lingered in the closet, a painful reminder of a time when my life felt solid and real. The courthouse was a monument of cold stone and echoing marble. The air inside was heavy, smelling of floor polish, old paper, and a faint, underlying current of human anxiety. Every sound was magnified in the cavernous hallways, the click of heels on the floor, the murmur of hushed conversations, the slam of a heavy wooden door. It was a place designed to make you feel small and insignificant. Sarah met me at the entrance to the courtroom. Her presence was a small, solid comfort in the overwhelming space. Deep breaths, Clara, she said, her voice low and steady. Remember what we talked about. Answer only the question that is asked. Do not volunteer information. Do not get emotional. Thorn will try to provoke you. Don't let him. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. We walked in. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, but no less intimidating. The wood was dark and imposing, from the judge's bench to the jury box to the pews where a few spectators sat. Leo was already there, sitting beside Marcus Thorn at the plaintiff's table. He was wearing a dark, somber suit, his expression a carefully crafted mask of sorrow and reluctance. He looked like a man forced into a terrible duty. He glanced at me as I sat down, his eyes holding that same look of false pity that made my skin crawl. He was the architect of my own personal hell, and he was playing the part of a concerned brother. The trial began with a slow, grinding momentum. Opening statements. Marcus Thorn's voice filled the room, smooth and persuasive. He painted a heartbreaking picture for the judge. There was no jury, it was a bench trial. He described a beloved mother, Eleanor, fading into the twilight of her life, her mind clouded by illness. And at her side, a daughter, Clara. A daughter who, he claimed, was not a selfless caregiver, but a deeply troubled woman, isolated and lonely, who had grown pathologically dependent on her mother. This case, Thorn said, his voice resonating with false sincerity, is not about money. It is about protecting a legacy. It is about honoring what Eleanor Jensen truly would have wanted, before her judgment was compromised, before she was subjected to the constant, overwhelming, and, sadly, unstable influence of a daughter who could not separate her own needs from her mother's. When Sarah gave her opening statement, she was direct and factual. She portrayed me as a loving, devoted daughter who had sacrificed her own life to care for her ailing mother, fulfilling her mother's most cherished wish to remain in her home. She spoke of the will as a clear, rational document, a final gift from a grateful mother to the child who had stood by her. It was the truth, but it felt so plain, so simple, compared to the dark, twisted drama Thorne was weaving. The first witnesses were neighbors. Mr. Henderson from next door, a man I'd shared polite hellos with over the fence for years. Thorne asked him, "Mr. Henderson, in the last year of Mrs. Jensen's life, did you ever hear any unusual sounds coming from the house?" Mr. Henderson shifted uncomfortably in the witness stand. "Well, yes. A few times. I heard shouting." "Shouting? Could you tell who was shouting?" "It sounded like Clara. She sounded very upset." Sarah, on cross-examination, tried to give it context. "Mr. Henderson, you know that Mrs. Jensen was very ill, correct? And that Clara was her sole caregiver?" "Yes." "Is it possible that what you heard was the sound of a daughter under immense stress, perhaps venting her frustration in what she thought was the privacy of her own home?" "I suppose so," he mumbled. But the image was already planted, me, shouting, unhinged. Then they called Aunt Carol. My own aunt. She walked to the stand slowly, avoiding my eyes. My heart felt like a stone in my chest. Thorne handled her gently, like a precious, fragile piece of evidence. "Mrs. Albright," he began, "you are Eleanor Jensen's sister, correct? You were very close?" "Yes, we were," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Did you have concerns about your niece, Clara, in the last few years?" Aunt Carol hesitated, wringing her hands in her lap. Well, she seemed very isolated. Every time I called, she sounded so tired, so on edge. And Leo. Leo would call me. He was so worried. Did Leo ever share anything with you that amplified that worry?" Thorne asked, his voice soft. "Yes," she whispered. He played me a recording of a phone call he had with Clara." Sarah shot to her feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay. And foundation, how was this recording obtained?" "I'll rephrase," Thorne said smoothly, before the judge could rule. He turned back to my aunt. "Mrs. Albright, what did you hear on that recording?" in Clara's own voice. "Objection," Sarah said again, more forcefully. "Sustained," the judge said, his voice a low rumble. "Mr. Thorne, move on." But again, the damage was done. The word recording was now hanging in the air of the courtroom, a specter of my private pain made public. Aunt Carol's testimony, filled with her concerns fueled by Leo's lies, painted a picture of me as someone the whole family was worried about. Finally, it was Leo's turn to take the stand. He walked up with a heavy-hearted solemnity, as if ascending a scaffold. He looked directly at the judge, his expression one of deep anguish. "Mr. Jensen," Thorne began, "this must be very difficult for you." "It's the hardest thing I've ever had to do," Leo said, his voice thick with emotion. "I love my sister. But I love my mother, too. And I have to honor her memory, the real her." For the next 2 hours, he spun his web. He talked about Mom before she got sick, how vibrant and full of life she was. He talked about his close relationship with her, conveniently forgetting the months that would go by without a visit. Then he began to talk about me. He described our phone calls, twisting my words, my tears of exhaustion into evidence of my instability. "She'd call me, sometimes in the middle of the night, just weeping," he said, shaking his head sadly. "Saying she couldn't go on. That the house was a prison. She sounded paranoid. She thought the neighbors were watching her. She accused me of not caring, of abandoning her. Her moods would swing wildly. One minute she was fine, the next she was screaming. Every word was a distortion, a caricature of the truth. He was taking the raw, ugly reality of caregiver burnout and grief and framing it as mental illness. Then came the centerpiece of his attack. Thorne said, "Mr. Jensen, you became so concerned about your sister's behavior that you felt you had to start documenting it. Is that correct?" "Yes," Leo said, his voice barely a whisper. "For her own good. I was afraid she was a danger to herself, or even to Mom. I didn't know what to do." "I'd like to play a piece of audio for the court," Thorne announced. A voicemail message left by Clara Jensen for her brother on the evening of May 12, approximately 3 months before their mother's passing. Sarah objected vehemently, arguing about privacy laws and the context of the recording, but the judge, after a brief argument, allowed it. He said it was relevant to my state of mind. A speaker was switched on. And then, my own voice filled the courtroom. But it wasn't my voice. It was a raw, ragged, desperate shriek. "You don't understand, Leo. You're never here. You just swan in for a weekend and play the perfect son. You don't see what it's like." She didn't know who I was today. She thought I was a stranger, an intruder. She screamed at me. I can't do this anymore. I hate this house. I hate my life. Do you hear me? I hate it." The recording ended with the sound of a long, agonized sob, then a click. Silence descended on the courtroom. It was a thick, suffocating blanket of shame. I remembered that day. It had been the worst day. Mom had been in the grip of a terrible dementia-fueled paranoia. She had fought me, scratched me, looked at me with eyes full of terror, not recognition. I had called Leo afterward, desperate for a lifeline, for a kind word from my brother. He hadn't answered. I had left that message, a primal scream into the void. And he had saved it. He had saved my moment of absolute rock-bottom despair to use as a weapon against me. I looked at the judge. His face was unreadable, but I saw a flicker of something, pity? Concern? I looked at Leo. He had his head in his hands, performing the role of a devastated brother. Marcus Thorne stood there, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. In that moment, everything broke inside me. The carefully constructed dam of composure I had built crumbled, and a hot, tidal wave of pure rage and grief washed through me. I felt a sob tear its way up from my soul. My carefully planned stability was gone. I was just a woman whose deepest pain had been put on display and twisted into something monstrous. And as I sat there, shaking and crying silently at the table, I knew, with a sickening certainty, that he was winning. He was making me look insane, and he was doing it using my own broken heart. The trial adjourned for the day shortly after the voicemail was played. The judge's face was a stony mask as he called the recess, his gaze lingering on me for a moment too long. The sound of his gavel was like a nail being hammered into my coffin. The walk out of the courtroom was a blur of shame. I couldn't look at anyone. I could feel the stares of the few people in the gallery, the pitying glance from the court clerk, the triumphant smirk I knew was on Marcus Thorne's face. Leo, ever the actor, rushed over to me as we stepped into the echoing marble hallway. "Clara, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice a stage whisper of false concern. He actually reached for my arm. I recoiled as if his hand were a hot iron. The shock of his touch jolted me out of my grief-stricken stupor and into a state of pure, cold fury. "Don't you touch me," I hissed, my voice low and shaking with an intensity that surprised even me. "Don't you ever speak to me again." His face flickered for a fraction of a second. The mask slipped, and I saw the real Leo underneath, the cold, calculating man who had orchestrated this entire nightmare. Then, just as quickly, the mask was back in place. He sighed, a sound of profound theatrical sadness. "I understand you're upset," he said, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "I'm just so worried about you." He turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, trembling, looking exactly like the unstable, hysterical sister he had just described to the court. Sarah guided me to a small, windowless conference room. The air was stale, the silence a buzzing in my ears. I sank into a chair, the sobs I had been holding back finally breaking free. They were ragged, ugly sounds torn from the deepest part of my soul. I wasn't just crying for the humiliation, or for the house. I was crying for the brother I thought I had, for the family that was now just a pile of ashes. Sarah let me cry for a few minutes, her presence a quiet, non-judgmental anchor in the storm. She pushed a box of tissues across the table. When my sobs finally subsided into shuddering breaths, she spoke, her voice calm and firm. "He's good, Clara. I'll give him that. He and Thorn have built a powerful, emotional narrative. It's all circumstantial, it's all twisted, but it's effective. He's going to win, isn't he?" I whispered, wiping my eyes with a crumpled tissue. "The judge, the way he looked at me. He thinks I'm crazy." "The judge is a human being," Sarah said. "Right now, he's hearing a very compelling story. Tomorrow, we start telling ours. You're going on the stand." A fresh wave of terror washed over me. Me? After that? What can I possibly say? They'll tear me apart. Thorn will make me cry, he'll make me angry. He'll prove Leo's point. "No, he won't," Sarah said, leaning forward, her gaze intense. "Because you're not going to give him that. You are not going to be the victim tomorrow. You are not going to be the hysterical, fragile woman from that voicemail. You are going to be your mother's daughter. You are going to be the woman who spent 5 years caring for her, who knows every detail of her life, every wish, every fear. You are going to tell the truth. We just need to find a way to make the truth louder than his lies." I went home that night to the silent, waiting house. It no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a crime scene, a place full of ghosts and memories that were being tainted, rewritten. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sit still. I paced from room to room, the floorboards groaning under my feet, my own voice from that horrible voicemail echoing in my head. I hate this house. I hate my life. Had I meant it? In that one terrible moment, maybe I had. But it wasn't the truth. It was a snapshot of a single moment of despair in a 5-year-long journey of love. How could I make a judge understand that? I ended up in my mother's bedroom, drawn by a need to feel close to her. I sat on the edge of her bed, the handmade quilt cool beneath my hands. My eyes fell on the small, rosewood writing desk in the corner. It was where she kept her stationery, her address book, her stamps. It was where she would sit for hours, writing letters to friends and family. I hadn't touched it since she died. It felt too final. On impulse, I walked over and slowly, reverently, lifted the lid. The scent of old paper and dried ink filled the air. Everything was neat, organized, just as she'd left it. Stacks of stationery, a collection of pens, a little box of paper clips. I ran my fingers over the smooth wood, a lump forming in my throat. I opened the top drawer. It was filled with old cards, birthdays, Christmases, Mother's Days, that Leo and I had sent her over the years. I saw my childish scrawl from when I was 7 next to a slick, store-bought card Leo had sent from college. I opened the second drawer. It was deeper. It held boxes of old photographs, a tangle of ribbons, and at the very back, tucked underneath a stack of blank envelopes, I saw it. A book. It wasn't a diary, not exactly. It was a simple, cloth-bound gardener's journal. The cover was a faded green, with a gold-embossed title, My Garden Year. My heart started to beat a little faster. Mom had been a fastidious gardener. She'd planned her plantings, tracked the weather, and made notes on what thrived and what didn't. I had given her this journal about 3 years ago, thinking it would be a nice hobby for her on her good days. I didn't know if she had ever even used it. With trembling fingers, I lifted it out. It felt heavy, solid. I opened it to the first page. Her handwriting, a little shakier than it used to be but still elegant and clear, filled the page. April 4th. The first crocuses are up. A splash of purple against the dreary brown of winter's end. A sign of hope. Clara helped me out to the porch today. The sun was warm on my face. She has such a gentle touch. I don't know what I would do without her. I turned the page. And then another, and another. It was all there. Page after page of entries, detailing not just the life of her garden, but the life of her last years. She wrote about the flowers, yes, but she wove her life in between the notes on soil pH and rainfall. May 10th. We planted the tomatoes today. Clara did all the heavy digging. Her hands were covered in dirt. She looked so happy. This garden is her sanctuary as much as it is mine. It's where we can be together, just us, and forget the world of sickness and pills. June 22nd. Leo called. A 10-minute call from his car. He sounds so distant. Like he's calling from another planet. He asked if I was holding up. Such a strange phrase. I am not holding up. I am living. I am watching the bees on the lavender. I am listening to the finches. Clara read to me from that new novel. That is living. My breath hitched. I kept reading, my eyes flying across the pages. She wrote about her bad days, her confusion, her frustration. But she always wrote about me, too. July 16th. A difficult day. I couldn't remember the word for fork. It was right there, in my hand, but the name was gone. I grew so angry, so frustrated, I threw it across the room. Clara didn't flinch. She just picked it up, held my hand, and whispered, "It's okay, Mom. It's just a fork. Let's use a spoon." The patience of that girl is a miracle. And then, I found the entry that made the world stand still. It was dated almost exactly 2 years ago, just a week after she had signed the will with Mr. Abernathy. August 3rd. I saw Mr. Abernathy today and put my affairs in order. It is a weight off my mind. I have left the house to Clara. It is the only thing I can do to repay her for the years she has given me. Leo will not understand. He will think it is about the money. He thinks everything is about money. But it is not. This house is not an asset. It is a home. It is Clara's home now. She has earned it not with service, but with love. I worry he will give her trouble. He has a cruel streak he thinks he hides so well. He can twist things, make you doubt your own mind. I see it. I've always seen it. I am writing this down, here, among my flowers, so that the truth has roots. This is my wish. This is my clear and sober-minded decision. This house belongs to the person who tended its heart. Tears streamed down my face, but they were not tears of sorrow or shame. They were tears of validation, of love, of a fierce, burning triumph. She had seen it all. She had known. She had left me a weapon, not of hate, but of truth. It wasn't just a gardening journal. It was her testimony. I clutched the book to my chest. It smelled of her, of paper and pressed leaves and the faint, sweet scent of lavender. Tomorrow, I was going on the stand. But I wouldn't be going alone. The next morning, I walked into the courthouse with a newfound strength. The icy dread was gone, replaced by a calm, steady resolve. I handed the journal to Sarah in the conference room. She read the entries I had marked, her expression shifting from professional focus to a slow, widening smile. "This is it, Clara," she said, her voice full of a new energy. "This is our anchor. This is your mother's voice in the room." When my name was called, I walked to the witness stand. The wood felt solid beneath my hand. I sat down and looked not at Leo, not at Thorne, but directly at the judge. I was ready. Sarah began, her voice clear and strong. "Clara, we've heard a lot over the past day about your emotional state. We've heard you described as unstable, hysterical, and fragile. I want you to tell the judge, in your own words, what it was like to care for your mother in her final years." And so I told them. I didn't hold back. I spoke of the profound love and the profound exhaustion. I described the joy of seeing her smile at the sight of a new rosebud, and the heartbreak of her looking at me with no recognition in her eyes. I explained the context of the voicemail, the sheer desperation of that single, terrible day. I spoke of my love for my mother, my love for our home. Then it was Thorne's turn. He approached me like a wolf circling its prey. "Miss Jensen," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "a very moving story. But it doesn't change the facts. You admit you were depressed. You admit you would cry and scream. You admit you hated your life. How can we believe that your mother, in her frail state, wasn't influenced by this constant storm of emotion?" "My mother wasn't a frail, witless woman," I said, my voice steady, surprising myself with its strength. "She was dying, yes. Her mind had moments of confusion. But her heart, her spirit, they were as strong as ever. And she saw everything." This was Sarah's cue. "Your Honor," she said, standing up, "we would like to enter into evidence the personal journal of Eleanor Jensen, written in her own hand during the last years of her life." Thorne immediately objected, but Sarah was ready. "Your Honor, this journal is a contemporaneous record of the decedent's state of mind. It directly addresses the claims of both testamentary capacity and undue influence." The judge allowed it. He took the faded green book in his hands. He put on his reading glasses. The courtroom was silent, the only sound the soft rustle of pages as he read the entries Sarah had bookmarked. I watched his face. I saw his eyebrows raise. I saw his expression soften. I saw him read the entry about the will, and then read it again. He looked up, first at Leo, then at me. For the first time, I felt like he was truly seeing me. He cleared his throat. He looked at Thorne. "Do you have any further questions for this witness, Mr. Thorne?" Thorne looked flustered, blindsided. No, Your Honor. No further questions." "You may step down, Ms. Jensen," the judge said. The rest of the trial was a formality. Closing arguments were made. Thorne's felt hollow now, his dramatic narrative deflated by the simple, powerful truth of my mother's own words. Sarah's closing was short and powerful. She held up the journal. "Leo Jensen has asked you to judge his sister's state of mind," she said to the judge. "He has presented a portrait of her based on stolen moments of pain. But the most important person, the person at the center of this, Eleanor Jensen, already made her judgment. Her mind was clear. Her heart was full. And her final wish is written right here. Not in legal jargon, but in ink and love, among notes about her roses and her tomatoes. She wanted her daughter, the woman who tended the garden of her life, to have her home. We ask that you honor that wish." The judge didn't take long to deliberate. When he came back, the silence in the room was absolute. He looked at Leo, his face stern. "I find the claims of the plaintiff, Leo Jensen, to be without merit," he said, his voice ringing with authority. "The evidence presented, most notably the decedent's own journal, paints a clear picture of a woman of sound mind who was deeply grateful for the loving care her daughter provided. The will of Eleanor Jensen, dated August 3rd, is hereby validated. The property at 1427 Elm Street belongs to Clara Jensen. This case is dismissed." The sound of his final gavel was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. A wave of relief so powerful it was like a physical force washed through me, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could truly breathe. I looked over at Leo. His face was a mask of disbelief and pure, unadulterated rage. The charming, concerned brother was gone for good. All that was left was the greedy, hollow man underneath. Our eyes met for a moment across the courtroom. There was no remorse in his gaze. Only hatred. And in that moment, I knew that my brother was lost to me forever. But I had found myself. And I was going home.